today's video, I'm once again going to be talking about triads, and part of me is thinking maybe I should issue an apology for always going on about this stuff in my videos, but then the other part of me thinks, well, no, it's important that I talk about this stuff. There's a lot to say, and it's just one of the most crucial things that you can be working on the guitar. Triads are kind of central to the way that I think about the guitar, the way that I play, and there are just so many uses for these little 3-note shapes, and they're just such an important thing to be working on as a guitar player. Obviously you want to have covered your very basics, so your cowboy chords, bar chords, pentatonic scales, but after that I think triads are the obvious next step. And it's kind of an inexhaustible thing as well. You're going to be using these things throughout your guitar playing career in very simple ways or in very advanced ways. There are just so many possibilities when it comes to triads. So what I'm going to do in this video is to show you a few of the ways that I like to use these things, and some of these concepts are going to be very simple and beginner friendly, and I'm going to get into a few more advanced things as well. And it so happens that this video coincides with the launch of a new Triads course which I've just filmed. I'll put the details about that course below this video, and it's kind of a beginner / intermediate level course. It covers all of the basics, all of the essentials. So if you'd really like to have a deep understanding of what triads are all about, then you might like to check out the course. But for now, let's get started with this video. And at its most simple, triads are just 3-note chords, and they are these convenient little grips or shapes on the fretboard. They sound great and they're very easy to use. And the 3 notes we're using, you can think of them as being derived from a major scale. So if you take the 1st, the 3rd and the 5th notes from any major scale, then you have a major triad. If you want a minor triad, then all you need to do is adjust the 3rd. You can flatten the 3rd, move that note down 1 fret, and you've got a minor triad. And really they're just another way of playing your major and minor chords. So in some situations you might want to play open cowboy chords, other times you might want to play bar chords, sometimes you might want to use triads. And one of the advantages of triads is that they tend to work well in lots of different situations. Particularly if you're playing with other musicians, you've got quite a crowded mix of different instruments, then triads are often a really good bet. You can find your place in the music a lot better. Or maybe you're playing with another guitar player, they're holding down the bar chords or the cowboy chords. Rather than just double what they're doing, you can use these triad shapes. So they're very, very versatile. Let's do some playing then, and I've got a little backing track which I'm going to be using throughout this video. It's a very simple 4-chord progression, and I'm going to use that to demonstrate some of my favorite uses of triads. So the backing track is in the key of A minor. It starts on A minor, then we've got C, then F, and then D minor, and those chords just repeat in a loop. So if you want to think of this chord progression in terms of numbers, we've got the 1 chord, the 1 minor chord, this is the flat 3 major chord, this is the flat 6 which is a major chord, and this is the 4 chord which is a minor chord. So all of those chords are diatonic to the key of A minor. There's no kind of weird stuff going on there. So the first thing I want to do is just play a very simple triad based rhythm guitar part that's going to fit our chord progression. So I'm going to use the top 3 strings and play some very simple shapes. We're going to start with A minor, the first chord in our progression, and I'm going to play it like this. So I've got frets 2, 1 and open. The root note is this note here, 2nd fret on the 3rd string, that's an A note. Then we've got a C and an E, so that's the root, the flat 3rd and the 5th. That gives us the essential notes in an A minor chord, and then we can just find the other shapes that we need on this same group of 3 strings. So the next chord is going to be C, so I've got a C note here at the 5th fret, and then we can plug in this triad grip. It's frets 5, 5 and 3, that's C major, and then we can use that same shape, slide it up here. We've got the 10th fret here, 10, 10 and 8, that's an F, triad, F major, triad, and then for D minor we just want to find our root note, which is here, and then fret 7, 6 and 5. That's our D minor shape. So we're dealing with two different shapes here. We've got this shape, which is the major shape, and then you take the middle note and move it down one fret. You've got that minor shape. All of these shapes obviously movable along the fretboard, so you really just need to find the root note that you need and then plug in either the major shape or the minor shape, and you're going to be able to play along to most chord progressions. So we've got these four shapes: A minor, C, F and D minor, and with those shapes I can just play a very simple chord progression. And with these kind of guitar parts you don't need to do much. You've got bass, drums, there's going to be a keyboard on the backing track as well, so I could just be very spacious, just let these chords hang, strum them once, and you know, that can sound really cool. I'm going to use a few effects, maybe some delay, and that could be enough. Or perhaps you might want to just pick some of those notes separately. And there are other places on the fretboard where you could find these shapes. A key concept when it comes to triads is this idea of string sets, so groups of 3 strings. I was just playing on the top string set, so strings 1, 2 and 3. We could bring these ideas down onto the next string set, so strings 2, 3 and 4, and do exactly the same thing. So we've got A minor, C, F, D minor. So you've got another set of shapes you can use. That's the beauty of these shapes, is that you can play them in lots of different areas of the fretboard, different registers, which enables you to find your place in the mix. You know, maybe you want to play something that's quite high, that sits on top of what else is going on, or you might want to go in the middle register, or even play something down a little bit lower. It all kind of depends on what else is going on in the mix. So now I'm just going to demonstrate some of that stuff over the top of this backing track. So that's a very simple approach, but it does sound really good in this situation, I think. With this kind of a backing track, it's quite slow, it's spacious, it's atmospheric. You don't want to overplay and get too fancy. So I think that kind of approach just works perfectly. But there are some further options. So how about we try something like this? We could play that same chord progression, but stick in one area of the fretboard. Maybe go... or perhaps here. Or so what I did in that example, I was still just using A minor, C, F and D minor chords, but I was using some inversions to change to the closest available triad shape. So I started with this shape here. This is A minor, but it's in the first inversion, which just means that the third, or the flat third technically, is the lowest note. So we've got C, E and A. The root note is the highest note in this shape. And if I change to the nearest C triad, we could do it like this. This is a root position shape. The root is the lowest note. And we could play F like this. This is another inversion, so this time the fifth is the lowest note. We've got C, F and A. The root note is in the middle of this shape. And then D minor, I mean, you've got options. I could play it there, but I think the closest available D minor would be here, which is once again in the root position. So we've got this bunch of 4 shapes and they all connect together nice and smoothly. And then you can do that in some other areas of the neck. So I think I played it up here, so A minor, C, F, D minor. You could play it up here as well. You can move it over onto the other string sets as well, so A minor, C, F, and D minor. Quite quickly you've got the different string sets, your different inversions. You've got tons and tons of possibilities. So obviously will take a lot of work to get really fluent with this stuff, and it's kind of an ongoing project for most players, but it's well worth spending the time with this stuff and just developing that kind of fluency where you can find any chord, major or minor, on any of the string sets in any of the inversions, and then you're able to find the closest available triad shape as the next chord in any given chord progression. So I just want to do this over the backing track. I'm going to play on the top string set and just smoothly connect between those different chords. Perhaps underrated use of triads is to use them when you're soloing. And most people, when they think of triads, they think, well, yeah, they're chords and you'll use them to create rhythm guitar parts, but you can equally just break up the notes of those shapes and use them when you're soloing. And this is something that I do all of the time. And one of the main advantages of this approach is you're always going to find the good sounding notes. If you just follow the chords in a chord progression using triads, you're going to be hitting those chord tones, and it gives your soloing a much more melodic and kind of sophisticated sound, rather than just relying on the normal kind of pentatonic scales, major and minor scales, whatever. So it's something I do a lot. I might not solo exclusively using triads, but I'll kind of mix in some of those other approaches as well. But if you do focus on those chord tones, then you're always going to get satisfying and melodic results. And really it's just as simple as playing the notes in these shapes one after the other instead of strumming them like chords. So we can take this A minor triad and we can just play it as separate notes. So you can go from low to high, high to low, mix up the order of the notes, introduce a bit of rhythm, and you can create some quite interesting things, and then take that through the chord progression, maybe changing to the nearest available shape for the next chord, and you can come up with some really nice melodies. So going from A minor to C, then F, D minor, and you can play that obviously in various different areas of the neck. So I'm going to solo over this chord progression. I'm going to keep it simple, and this is something that I like to do when soloing with triads. It kind of forces you to play in a simple melodic kind of way. If you're playing using scales, the tendency is just to fall back on stock kind of blues and rock licks, but when you're playing with triads, then you're really just thinking about melodies and chord tones, and you end up with a different kind of solo. really like to do is to embellish triads to add extra colours. So the basic triads are giving you your chord tones, they're your kind of core solid good sounding notes, but you can decorate them and add in some other kind of colours. So for me it's quite a visual thing on the fretboard. So I see my triad shape, and then around that I can see other available colours, and you can kind of come at this from a theoretical point of view, or you can just use your ear to guide you to the good sounding notes. I kind of do, for me it's a combination of both of those things. So, I know where the notes are in terms of the intervals on the fretboard, but also if I hear something I try and find it on the fretboard too and be guided by what sounds good. So let me just give you some examples here. So if we take this A minor triad shape, for example, we've got the flat third, the fifth, and the root. Those are our chord tones, but we could add in some other notes. So 2 frets above the root is the second or the ninth. That's usually going to be a really nice sounding colour. So we can go between the triad and the triad with that added extra note. You can arpeggiate this stuff. You can find other notes surrounding that shape as well. So really most of the good sounding notes are going to come from the key, so it pays to be aware of what those notes are. But the fourth, the second are going to sound good. The seventh of one kind or another, the flat seventh in this case, is going to be another good sounding note. And you can find that kind of thing around the other shapes as well. So if you've got a C, you can add in the sixth, add in the second once again. The second is kind of one of my go-to notes. I always think that sounds really nice. Again, got the F chord here. You can find that second 2 frets above the root. And then D minor. So you can decorate these basic shapes and you come up with some really interesting parts. So let me just try and do that against the backing track now. Another thing I like to do a lot is to use triads as a source of double stops. Again, this is something that's perhaps underappreciated, underutilized, but if you think about it, you can take any triad shape and then break it down into pairs of notes. So if we take this A minor shape once again, we could just play the top 2 notes in that shape as a double stop. We could play the next 2 notes. We could even play the outside notes here. And we end up with this. This is a fourth, we got a third, and we got a sixth interval. And you can do that with any of these triad shapes, any of the string sets, any of the inversions, and you've got so many possibilities. So I'm just going to try that over our chord progression. And what I like to do is just to map out my triad shapes, perhaps in a single position to begin with. So you could think A minor, and then you just think about those pairs of notes in the triad shapes. Then it changes to C, and we've got and then F, and then D minor, and then you can kind of juggle with those shapes, mix them up, try and find some nice ideas and melodies. play one more time then, and I'm going to take a solo, and I'm going to play in a bit more of a free kind of a way. It's still going to be based on triads, but I'm going to embellish. I'm going to play all over the fretboard, the kind of thing that I might play if I'm playing on a song or playing with a band. So it's going to be improvised. We'll see what happens, but I hope it's going to be an example of a nice, simple, melodic, triad-based solo. So I hope this video has given you some insights into just how powerful, how useful these triad shapes can be, whether you're playing rhythm guitar and just coming up with some simple parts, or whether you're soloing and embellishing these triads in a slightly more advanced way. And of course there are further uses of triads which I've not managed to cover in this quite short video. Maybe I'll get into some of these things in a future video, but things like superimposed triads, where you're using triads as a way of accessing higher extensions in a chord, whether you're playing rhythm guitar or lead guitar. That can be quite an interesting thing to explore, particularly if you're a more sophisticated kind of jazz player. You've got things like open voiced triad spread triads, where you're not playing the three notes on adjacent strings, you're kind of spreading them out to give you a more of a kind of spacious atmospheric sound. I've touched on that in previous videos, but I might do a proper video on that subject at some point in the future. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. Did I mention that I've got a new Triads course available? Link underneath this video. Do check that out, particularly if you're new to Triads. Maybe you are watching this video and there are a few ideas, concepts that I touched on that you didn't quite understand. This course is really detailed. It goes over all of the essentials when it comes to Triad, so do check that out if you're interested. And I'll see you for the next video here on YouTube very soon. Bye.